So earlier this year, I heard that Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines is adding a true behemoth to their roster of already giant cruise ships that ply the waters out of the Gulf. You may have heard about this too. The newest edition is called the Utopia of the Seas, which I think was named without like a shred of irony, actually. And this particular utopia will displace 250,000 tons of water, contains 5 swimming pools, 8 hot tubs, 3 water slides, and 2 casinos. Yes, you heard that right. 2 casinos, which just goes to ensure that if you haven't burned enough money already on tickets, there will be 370 slot machines ready to separate you from your cash that you foolishly brought on board. And this Utopia of the Seas will house 7,958 people. But why don't we just round up to 8,000 for simplicity's sake? So if you are looking for a spring break opportunity, I have one for you. You can join 8,000 of your closest friends on 20 decks of bunker fuel burning microcosm of the Las Vegas Strip. Utopia of the Seas indeed. I'm being just a little sarcastic. You may have picked up on that. And as you can probably tell, I'm not personally a fan of giant mega cruise ships, although it's perfectly fine if you are. It's just that nothing about 8,000 people and 2 casinos, sounds to me like rest and relaxation, peace and quiet, which is generally what I look for in a vacation. That's the thing about ships, though, right? In ships, you are always just crammed in together. It seems that way. Real estate is always at a premium when you're on the water, no matter how big the ship is. I remember when I was a kid, I used to love visiting these retired World War II era Navy ships that were all parked out in Charleston Harbor. When I grew up, we'd go down to the beach down there, and we'd often go and visit these ships. I think there's a similar thing in San Diego. Maybe you've had the opportunity to go there. I used to love especially visiting the USS Yorktown, which entered service in 1943. It's an Essex-class aircraft carrier and participated in the Pacific theater of the Second World War and in Vietnam. And even in this giant ship, which carried over 100 aircraft, the crew quarters, I remember the crew quarters were always really, really small, tiny. Just a little space. Even the captain, even the top officers just had tiny little places that they could go to, just small personal quarters. And the enlisted personnel usually just got a bunk. A bunk in a room. That was about it. I have to tell you, I did check the statistics, and I was shocked to learn that the USS Yorktown is now just a tiny little skiff by modern standards. The USS Yorktown has just over 10%, yes, 10% of the displaced tonnage of this latest cruise ship from Royal Caribbean, which means that modern cruise ships are literally an order of magnitude larger than World War II aircraft carriers. Just think about that for a second. I guess you have to find room for those 2 casinos somewhere, right? But of all the cramped and crowded cruise ships that have ever existed on planet Earth, can you imagine anything wilder than Noah's Ark? Noah and family, we're told, took 2 of every kind of animal with them, although in another place in Genesis it says they took 7 of the clean animals and 2 of the unclean, which is an unthinkable, unrivaled menagerie of, biblical proportions, right? While I certainly don't read the Noah story literally today, I think it's quite interesting and entertaining to think about it that way. Hippos bumping up against javelinas, aardvarks rooting around near the hooves of zebras, alligators angrily protesting under the wary eyes of water buffalo. It would have been a shuffling, bleeding, carnivalesque mass of animals. Can you even imagine the smell? Can you even imagine? And for 40 days, we are told, this floating zoological exhibit bobbed about on the waves until finally, as we read about today from Genesis, the ark lands on dry ground, much to the relief of the animals, I'm sure, and Noah's family most of all, who probably jumped over the sides just to kiss that dry ground. Presumably there were neither water slides nor casinos on that particular cruise. And there on that soggy ground, Noah builds an altar. It's the family's little temple in this water-soaked world. And they pray with thanksgiving. And God tells them that the bow in the clouds is a sign of a covenant with them. And when they see its colors, they will remember the salvation of God. And then St. Peter, as we hear from his letter today, picks up on that same image as being symbolic of baptism. It's not too far off if you think about it. In the story of the ark, the old world with all of its corruption, with all of its problems, is wiped away to make something new. And in baptism, our hearts are purified to serve the living God, and we become joined to the body of Christ. But that's not the only image that ark story gives us. Do you know what this building, this space you're in right now is called? I mean, obviously it's a church, of course, but this part of the building, this is traditionally called the nave of a church. Now, this church was built 20 years ago, and so its style is much more contemporary. We're kind of in the round here. But I want you to just imagine in your mind's eye a very traditional style of church architecture with that long central aisle, the pews running down the side. And now imagine that the wooden or stone supports which hold up the roof like the ribs of a building. You know how those look on the inside? Maybe you've been down to San Xavier del Bac down here southwest of Tucson. You've seen that kind of beautiful traditional architecture. That long central portion of a church was traditionally called a nave. Nave is an odd word, but it has a humble origin. The word is drawn from the Latin word navis, which literally means ship. That's what it meant. It's the same root word as our root words for navy or naval. Same word. If you imagine a traditional nave in your mind's eye, and you look down the center of that aisle the right way, you can kind of imagine that it looks like the bottom of the hull of a wooden sailing ship, but just flipped upside down. If you took out those wooden decks of a ship and you looked directly down at the bottom of the hull, you can probably imagine the similarity in design, the way the ribs are there, the kind of curved central portion of it. Because many carpenters back in ancient times, the kinds of folks who worked on churches, well, they also, guess what? They built ships. There were many of them living around the Mediterranean, right? They also built ships. And the designs were so similar that they used the same word for both spaces. Navis, which became nave. Now, I think if you really lean into this image, I hope you can see how beautiful it will become. A ship and a church have many things in common. Both are places where people seek refuge from the beating winds and waters, as they do in the story of Noah, from those storms of life that surround us metaphorically. Both are places where people travel together, heading towards a destination and the safety and security of their fellows. Although in our case, that destination is a spiritual one as much as anything else. And if the church is like a ship, you can just keep playing with that image, going all the way through with it. I think it's wonderful. What better ship to compare a church to than Noah's Ark? I mean, how many different animals are there in a church, right? There are many people in the church from many different backgrounds who are brought here for many different reasons. They're the ones who love incense and ceremony, the smells and the bells. And there are others who would prefer rock music and casual coffee hours and jeans. There are those who are as diligent as Aesop's fabled ants, and those who like to take it slow and meditatively. There are quiet mice and the ones who stand in the pulpit and won't be quiet. There are cooks, there are bakers, there are cleaners, there are helpers, there are prayer warriors and diligent servants. There is beautiful bird song from some and, other noises too. Right? You get my drift. All of us by choice or by conviction, are bound together in this strange enterprise. And there's literally nothing else in life that would necessarily bring us into the same room. The lions and the lambs, the hunters and the grazers, the lumbering workers and the fleet-footed runners, the whole of God's wonderful creation, the wild riot of its diversity and color, all of us in this place, this sacred ground, this ark. No matter how you look at it, it's a remarkable menagerie. You know, we probably get along at least as well as the disciples did. They certainly had their own conflicts and disagreements. In our church, too, we have our stresses and our bickering and our battles from time to time. We always will. We are very much human. But are we also not hoping for the same promised land? Are we not all kept here because the rains outside aren't worth braving alone? And so even if the ark is cramped and maybe a little smelly sometimes, even if it springs a few leaks, quite literally in the case of our roof once in a while, even if we grumble and want to run off to our own pens once in a while and just think it would be better if the whole thing might sink today, well, that storm outside is dreadful. And the church, even with all of its problems, is like a refuge from a hurricane. It's said that Noah's ark bobbed on the ocean for 40 days and nights while the wind howled and the rains came down. 40 days, folks, remember, is also the length of the season of Lent. It's also the length of Jesus' time in the wilderness. Isn't it wonderful how when you put all of those images together, they connect so beautifully? 40 days of Lent, 40 nights in the ark, the church itself like a ship on the stormy sea we call life. And that church, that ark, might have its problems and have them in spades, but where else really do we find shelter from life's storms? And where else do we go with the slimmest of hopes, with a fragment of dreams, to find that holy place, that mountain of God for which we have always been searching and has always been our hope? Because our hope in this fragile little storm-tossed ark is that one day the winds of this world will subside, and the rains will end, and the skies will clear, and the dove will return with a bit of greenery in her beak like a little speck of diamond, promising us that there is still life to be found. And the ark will stop on that holy mountain after all that has passed, and the waters will fall away. And we will all get out and stand in the sunlight with wobbly knees and even shakier hearts, each of us, with eyes looking towards heaven to see that promise of divine love, the covenant that passes our understanding, signed in the colors of the rainbow, as infinite and diverse as the church can be, and as God actually is. And a voice will come from those silver clouds. You are standing on holy ground, on my holy mountain. I love you. Join me at the table that I have prepared for you. Take your place that I have given you, that where I may be, you may be also. That where I am, you may be also. And that is our hope. That is our goal. That is the purpose of this voyage in this ark. To travel through the storms of life and find that holy mountain at the end. The place lit by the rainbow of God's promise. Holy God, during this season of storms, walk with us on our journey through life and through these trials of Lent. And gather us in the light of your resurrection when we at last approach your empty tomb. In your holy name.